Chapter 21 of Mental Fascination. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Knight. www.sandraknight.net. Mental Fascination by William Walker Atkinson. Concluding instruction. We have now reached the end of our consideration of the subject of mental fascination in this book. But you have reached only the beginning of the subject. When you close these pages, for the real subject rests in the action of the principles in real life. The effect of the instruction. Though you may not feel disposed to put into operation much of the instruction given herein, yet from your very acquaintance with what has been taught in these pages, you will be compelled to see the operation of the principles in the everyday life around you. You will see them in operation on every side, now that you are familiar with their laws of operation. And you will find yourself instinctively guarding against its influence just as you would guard against a threatened physical blow, and you will be surprised, and perhaps pained sometimes, at seeing people trying to influence you in this way, whom you would not have suspected of doing so. On the whole, you will be a much stronger man or woman by reason of the information herein given you. And you will have the advantage of knowing how to resist, defeat, and dispel the adverse influences that may be used to influence you. Remember the assertion of the positive will and the use of the positive denial. Additional information. There is one thing more that I wish to call your attention to before closing. Although strictly speaking, it forms part of the subject of telemental influence rather than that of mental fascination. I have mentioned this matter in my work on mental magic. In my lesson on the science of telementation, I allude to the use of telementation for the purpose of mental fascination, which is performed by some persons who have become acquainted with the subject. Distant fascination. The person wishing to influence another at a distance, just as he would in the case of personal interview, forms a mental image of the person whom he wishes to influence, and then proceeds just as if the person was actually before him, according to the methods mentioned in this book. I know of at least one teacher who advises his students to treat prospective customers and others with whom they expect to have dealings or relations as follows. Imagine your prospective customer or other person as seated in a chair before you which you are standing. Make the imagined picture as strong as possible, for upon this depends your success. Then proceed to treat the person just as you would if he were actually present. Concentrate your will upon him and tell him just what you expect to tell him when you meet him. Use all of the arguments that you can think of, and at the same time hold the thought that he must do as you say. Try to imagine him as complying with your wishes in every respect, for this imagining will tend to come true when you really meet the person. This rule may be used not only in the case of prospective customers, but also in the cases of persons whom you wish to influence in any way whatsoever. How to counteract the influence. Now all this is very plain to the student of this book and of my work on mental magic, for the principles employed are familiar to my students. The result of a practice like the above would undoubtedly tend to clear a mentative path in the other person's mind and make easier the effect of a subsequent interview. For the other person would be thus accustomed to the idea, thought, or feeling, and the work of clearing away the mental underbrush would be done in advance. But fortunately for us all, we have the antidote for this bane if we have acquainted ourselves with the underlying principles of the subject. So important do I regard this matter of self-protection against this telemental influencing that I propose adding to my remarks on the subject several paragraphs from my book on mental magic, which, although you have already read them, should appear right in this place in order to be impressed upon your mind in connection with what I have just said. I want you all to read again what I have said on this subject of self-protection, so here is the reproduction of a few rules to use on occasions when you think that someone is trying to treat or influence you. Better study them carefully. Here they are. Valuable rules. 1. In the first place, steady your mind and calm your feelings. Then pause for a moment and say the words, I am. Calmly and forcibly, at the same time forming a mental picture of yourself as a center of force and power in the great ocean of mind. See yourself as standing alone and full of power. Then mentally form a picture of your aura extending about a yard on all sides of you in an egg-shaped form. See that this aura is charged with your willpower, which is flowing outward, repelling any adverse mental suggestions that are being sent to you and causing them to fly back to the source from whence they came. A little practice will enable you to perfect this picture, which will greatly aid you in creating a strong positive aura of will, which will prove to be a magnetic armor and shield. It has helped many. I assert my individuality as a center of force, power, and being. Nothing can adversely affect me. My mind is mine own, and I refuse admittance to unwelcome suggestions for influences. My desires are my own, and refuse to admit undesirable variations by induction or otherwise. My will is my own, and I charge it with power to beat off and repel all undesirable influences. I am surrounded by an aura of positive will, which protects me absolutely. A useful denial. The following denial has proved of the greatest value to many. I deny to all or any the power to influence me against my best interest. I am my own master. These words may seem simple, but if you will use them, you will be surprised at their efficacy. You realize, of course, that it is the mental state aroused by the words that does the work, rather than any special virtue in the words themselves. Guard against impulses. 2. Guard yourself from acting upon impulses. When you feel a sudden or unaccountable impulse to do this thing or that thing, stop and assert your positive individuality, and then drive out all outside influences by repeating the affirmations, etc., given above, and by creating the proper mental picture. Then, when you have recovered your balance, consider the impulse and decide whether it is to your best interests or otherwise. You will be able to see this clearly by reason of your mental house cleaning a moment before. Then, if the impulse seems to be against your best interests, drive it from you, saying, I drive you away from me. You do not belong to me. Return to those who sent you, or other words to that effect. This may be rendered more forceful if you will but create a mental picture of the discarded idea flying away from you in the shape of a tiny thought wave. These mental pictures aid one very materially in such matters, both in the sending forth of an idea as well as in the discarding of one. The positive aura. 3. Cultivate the picture and idea of a positive aura, and always think of yourself as being encased in such a one. See yourself as a strong, positive I, a center of power encased in an impregnable sheath of auric force. You will thus be able to build up yourself into a mighty center. You will be surprised at the confused manner of people who try to influence you when they come in contact with this aura and find their suggestions and mentative currents being cast back upon themselves. Such people find themselves all broken up when they meet a condition like this, which they do not understand, for a very few of them are practical occultists. The mental picture of yourself as a center of power surrounded with a positive aura will, if persisted in, render you extremely positive, so that your influence is sure to be felt by the world with which you come in contact. Amusing sequels. You will often be amused by occurrences following after the rejection of these stray impulses, etc. You will find that if you have had an impulse to buy a certain thing or sell a certain thing at a sacrifice, that in a day or so, perhaps an hour or so, you will be approached by some person who will advise you personally to do that same thing, the person being likely to be benefited by the scheme or plan. I do not mean that such person has necessarily tried to influence you by mentative currents, for he may not have consciously done so, but nevertheless, that is just what has happened, and his desire or will has caused these currents to flow in your direction, and you have felt them. Now that your eyes have been opened to this fact, you will be amused and surprised to see how many corroborative proofs you will receive. But always insert your individuality as a center of power, and all will be well with you in these matters. The protective agent. I hope that the above reproduction of the advice given in Mental Magic will do you good, and once more remember the power of the positive denial as a protective agent. By its use you may disperse and scatter the mentative currents of others and surround yourself with an impregnable armor of mentative energy. And also remember this, which I have not said elsewhere, that the law of life is concerned with the protection of the individual and gives to each the weapons with which to preserve his individuality. So true is this that occultists know that there is the greatest difference in the use of the mentative power as an attacking force and as a protective force. I will illustrate this briefly. Protective individuality. A man's mentative force is immensely more powerful when he uses it to protect his individuality than when he uses it to attack the individuality of another. In fact, if everyone understood the laws of mentative defense and would avail himself of the information given by me under this head, there would be almost a total absence of mentative attack, for the futility of the same would soon be recognized. The only reason that the strong individuals are able to affect the weaker ones so frequently is because the other do not know their inner power and make no defense. In fact, the majority of people do not know of these laws at all, and if one tells them, they sneer and smile knowingly, tapping their foreheads to indicate that their informant is just a little off. Poor sheep and geese. They are so happy in their ignorance and conceit that it almost seems a pity to disturb them. Nature's protective armor. But to return to my subject, you will find that it will require a much less effort of will to protect your individuality than it will to attack the individuality of another. You will find that the law is on your side when you say, "I won't be influenced. I deny the power of another to weaken my individuality," for you have then called into operation that law of nature which is always in operation and which she gives to her creatures in the way of an instinctive protective force. So there is no occasion to be afraid. You are immune from attacks if you will but assert the force within you. The glory of individuality. And now, friends, in conclusion, I beg of you to remember that you are individuals, centers of mind, power, force, and energy, yes, centers of life in the great ocean of being. Each of you is something different from any other center, and the law wishes you to live your own life, develop your own individuality, assert your own birthright, and in the measure that you do so, so will the law be on your side. Do not let the snare of personal pride trip you up and entangle you in its meshes, for it is but an illusion. But glory in your pride of individuality, and do not be frightened, coaxed, seduced, lured, or driven by the race thought into the condition of the worm of the dust, person. Do not be a human doormat. Do not be a human sheep or goose, following some fool leader in a stately goose step or the sheep-like follow my leader fashion. Remember that you are men and women, that you are individuals for which the cosmic machinery has been laboring for ages in order to evolve. The statement of individuality. The statement of individuality that I am here now is a mighty one. It will always be I am with you. It will always be here with you. It will always be now with you. No matter what state your individuality may reach, no matter what point of space you may occupy, no matter what period of time it may be, it will always be true that I am here now. For it will always be your I that is speaking. It will always be am with you everywhere. Place will be here to you. All time will be now with you. May you unfold into a perception of this statement of individuality. For when you do, you will have reached a mental plane where even the principles herein taught will seem elementary to you, for you will have soared above them and their operation. May this and other works of mine be as ladders upon which you may mount, and which you may then kick away from under your feet as no longer needed. Students, I thank you and bid you auf Wiedersehen. May the law protect you till we meet again. End of Chapter 21. Concluding Instruction. Recording by Sandra Knight. www.sandraknight.net. End of Mental Fascination by William Walker Atkinson.